Hello everyone. So in this clip, we are going to be studying the components of blood. We previously learned that we have four main types of tissue in the human body: nervous, epithelial, connective, and muscle. Blood belongs to the connective tissue, and so this means that it is made up of an extracellular matrix, and in that matrix, we have cells that are suspended. And so in this scenario, in this blood category, our extracellular matrix is known as plasma. And then we also have cells and cell fragments. And so we're going to look at what those are throughout this clip. Okay, so let's begin. To examine the components of blood, and in order to see the ratio of cells and fragments to plasma, what you can do is you can take a sample of blood, place it in a test tube, and then place it in a machine that we call a centrifuge machine. And so this centrifuge machine is actually going to spin really fast for a few minutes, and it's going to divide the components of blood depending on their density. And so what you're going to notice after the test tube comes out of this machine is that the heaviest or the most dense elements are going to sink to the bottom. And so in this test tube, the most densest elements are actually going to be the red blood cells. And so the red blood cells, these are also known as the erythrocytes. Okay? And so red blood cells typically constitute between 37 to 52% of total blood volume. And this is what we call hematocrit. So there are actually slightly different constitutions in males versus females. So in females, on average, we would expect 37 to 48%, and males tend to have a little bit more, and so it's going to range between 45 to 52%. Okay. Next up, we have a very thin layer, and we call this the buffy coat. And this buffy coat consists of white blood cells, and white blood cells are also known as leukocytes. All right, as well as platelets. And so platelets are not actually cells, they're more so fragments of cells. But they're found in the buffy coat along with the white blood cells, and these typically constitute less than 1% of total blood volume. Alrighty, and so this is going to leave us with the topmost layer. And so the topmost layer is what we call plasma. And so plasma is typically or technically the extracellular matrix. So it's composed of 90% water, along with other proteins and dissolved substances that we will be discussing shortly. But plasma typically constitutes 55% of whole blood. All right, and this is, of course, the lightest, and so it's going to be the top layer in the centrifuge test tube. And so what does plasma contain? So 90% of plasma, 90 to 92%, is going to be water. Another important component are the proteins. And so there are different types of proteins that plasma contains, but a few of the most important are albumin. And albumin is important because it acts as a blood pH buffer. It also contributes to what we call oncotic pressure, also known as colloid osmotic pressure. Okay, and so this is basically a pull of water, which we will be discussing later on in the blood vessels chapter, and how we can maintain blood pressure, because albumin is a very important component in maintaining blood pressure. Another type of protein that we can find are the globulins. And these are very important for protection and transport. Okay, so one example would be the antibodies that your immune system produces. They're going to circulate in the blood, dissolved in the plasma, and that will offer you protection because that's your immune defense. And then another example of an important protein is what we call fibrinogen. Fibrinogen is going to become fibrin, and this is extremely important because it's the major component of blood clotting. Alrighty, and there you have it. These are 3 very important proteins that are found in plasma. Now, there are a few more things that you can find in plasma. I'm just going to list a few. So we have nutrients that are also found. Example would be glucose, amino acids, fatty acids, cholesterol, iron, etc. We also have electrolytes. Some of the most important or major ones are sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, etc. Bicarbonate. Plasma also carries around wastes, so waste products. Examples are urea, uric acid, creatinine, which is a muscle waste product, ammonia, bilirubin, and other components such as gases, so CO2, oxygen, nitrogen, as well as hormones. Okay, and so these are the 3 main components of blood. And so basically what you'll notice is that we outlined an extracellular matrix, which is plasma, primarily water, but then many other things are dissolved in there. And then we also have the buffy coat made up of white blood cells, platelets, and then red blood cells. Lastly, erythrocytes, leukocytes, and platelets are what we call the formed elements. All right, so formed elements. And what this means is that these components are visible under the microscope. They have membrane enclosed bodies, so they're either cells or fragments of cells like the platelets. And so these are visible under the microscope, and so they belong to a big category of formed elements, which makes up around 45-46% or so of your blood. And then the majority or the rest, 55%, is going to be plasma.